Hope everybody's doing okay. Um, this is part 21 of the Slaves of Satan series, and I've been trying to pivot into different topics throughout it and talk about all different aspects of how this evil took over the morality. Then this time I want to talk about a subject that I would like to go over more in detail when I have the time, but I want to talk about the Great Seal of the United States, the infamous eye on the back of the dollar bill, and I'm not gonna do a specific breakdown of the eye and what all it means because that thing has so many esoteric meanings. It would take an hour or longer to actually to break down the dollar bill. But most people will have a little bit of knowledge about the eye on the dollar bill or some of the other occult sizzles and logos on the back of it, but not too many people know who was one of the people that pushed so hard for it because it was put on the dollar bill during FDR and and when Henry Wallace was in office, but the person who pushed this to them that it would get on the dollar bill was a man named Nicholas Roerich, a mystic, back back then it actually um hurt the reputation of a presidency and vice presidency because the vice president um had association with with that type of person. Nowadays, unfortunately, I don't think anybody would care, but back then that was still considered taboo, especially if you were supposed to be the leader figure for the country. But it's come to my attention that almost nobody in the modern era really knows who this guy is. But it's kind of shocking considering how influential he is. So Nicholas Roerich, among many other things, he was a painter, writer, archaeologist, and just like many of these people that I've spoken about, he was a theosophist. Him and his wife, Helena, and they were both students of Madame Blavatsky and members of the Theosophical Society. They were in contact with the Ascended Masters. He was a philosopher into Russian symbolism, and he was one of the earliest people that pioneered hypnosis to in America. And what else is unique is that you don't really hear about someone who does this very much. And he also drew what he called hypnotic paintings. I'll put a couple up there on the screen, and if you look at them, you can tell that they're drawn in a pretty strange aspect. You can tell that he was most likely in altered states of mind while he was drawing that. Because when you look at it, when you go down the line of the majority of these occultists, they're all was artists. They was all into painting, drawing, writing, because and just how people get in a spiritual induced trance and write a book or write a poem or write a song. These people get in these altered states of consciousness, and they'll paint whole pictures as well. That's why you see so many of these occultists successful when it comes to the arts. He worked as a costume and set designer. He was a lawyer, a professional artist. Now, this is some examples of how influential he actually was. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize I believe multiple times. I know at least once. And there's something still in writing to this day called the roerich pact, which was pretty much an agreement between all major countries to try to preserve ancient relics or ancient pieces of art, paintings, just anything old of that you would see in a museum or something like that. And he was, while he was not raised in the Hindu religion, he was very into the Bhagavad Gita, which is what the Hindus call their holy book. It's very unholy, but that's what they call their holy book. Their holy book, right? Even though it's not. And most people in the Theosophical Society was encouraged to study the Indian texts. As I'm saying with the Buddhism ones too, because it's all about Eastern mysticism. Same with the Vedas. He was into the Indian Vedas. He studied Buddhism. He started his own religion with his wife Helena Roerich, um, called Agni Yoga, and it was kind of like a buffet style religion of Buddhism, Hinduism, Theosophicism, um, meditation on ascended masters. It's a little bit of everything, and just like the other theosophist, like I said earlier, he claimed to be in contact with several spiritual masters and some of the Mahatmas, which are the ones that Blavatsky and Alice Bailey talked to that looked like they were from um, um the Middle East or something, and he claimed that they were talking to him telepathically from the mountains in an esoteric Buddhist community. He had a lot of very strange claims. But before I go any further, he was the one who verbally pushed the seal to get put on the back of the dollar bill, because I tell people, um, you can mostly blame Crowley for all the moral decline, but when you really investigate this stuff, it also all goes back to theosophy. It all goes back to Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society, and remnants of her students. Um, Now, thankfully, her students kind of died out by the 50s or 60s, other than a small amount of people. But um, but Crowley's followers have not, and they've continued, and more have been made each generation. But when you look back in the past, from like the late 1800s to the 1950s, the I would say the influence was about equal. He has multiple museums open. There's a Roerich Museum in New York, as well as Moscow, and he also claimed to have seen flying saucers when there's very few people making these claims. And that's another thing, like the flying saucers, the so-called aliens, the Ascended Masters, the Astar Command. This these things normally don't sell themselves to people that worship Christ, because they know that they're not gonna fall for that kind of nonsense. Almost ever that you hear about somebody seeing one of these strange anomalies, it's either an occultist, someone that's into the Eastern religions, somebody that's not really a practicing Christian, or an atheist. You never really see what I would consider a true Christian speak about seeing these things. Now, I saw terrible things manifest when I was in apostasy, but since I focused my life um, back to the Lord's purpose, I haven't seen anything like that, and I did not when I was younger either. And Henry Wallace went as far as to say that he admired this guy. Now, this is what people don't understand. Just because most of these presidents have looked clean cut with a picket white fence family, and they look like they're from money, most people think it's out of the realm of possibilities for them to be into the occult or devil worship or paganism or any other type of antichrist religion. But this is what people that haven't studied this stuff don't realize. Most people that are deep into the occult, they don't they masquerade as total normal people, and typically have a pretty normal and what most people would consider a respectable walk of life. It's usually people like doctors, lawyers, people in the political field, veterinarians, people of high ranking in the military, um, politicians, government agents, FBI, CIA agents. It's usually not what you would expect. It's usually not um, some type of gothic looking person that has a bunch of piercings or wears satanic looking makeup. Sometimes they're into it, but usually the regular type of witch or Satanist tries to blend in with the public, and that's because they're usually actively committing crimes or doing something that they do not want getting out because it would ruin their career. And and I would make a very solid claim that every person of high rank in any civilized organization is doing something very wrong, or some type of occult worship to an evil deity of some sort. And it's also worth mentioning that that at the time Henry Wallace was a 32nd degree Mason and FDR was a 33rd degree Freemason. And I haven't talked about this guy for a while, but H.P. Lovecraft actually talked about his paintings in one of his books, or one of his letters. I could pull up what it was. He actually talked about his paintings, and he was actually very disturbed by them and found them creepy. And if people know who he was and the type of crazy things he wrote about, it really says something that these regular looking paintings would stand out to him. And because, and what I assume it was is someone like Lovecraft that was steeped in evil and the occult could probably have an eye for something that was that was channeled and automatically drawn by an evil spirit, if I would have to take a guess, because while Roerich's paintings look kind of strange if you stare at them long enough, there's someone that's not really in the know and they don't look evil. They do to me because I know what this guy was into, but the average person wouldn't really think much of it. There's also the Banner of Peace that he was involved in. Um, he was one of the lead neo theosophists, which means after like um, after the death of Helena Blavatsky. And at one time, he was so popular, there was even a spin off religion called roerichism, which was again pretty much like a buffet style religion of a bunch of different spiritual religious ideas of theosophy and different Eastern mystical religions all smashed together. But yeah, this is other than the evil spirits. This was the big driving force in getting the eye on the back of that dollar bill. But you don't really hear about this guy spoken of very often. So hopefully this performs better than the majority of them and gets out to a decent amount of people. Have a good rest of the night.